He freed a lion from a deadly trap, but what the lion did next shocked everyone. Alex Miller's hands trembled as he lowered the bowl of water toward the dying lion. Each of the beast's ribs protruded sharply through its dull, matted fur, a living skeleton where a majestic predator should have been. The lion's eyes, once fierce amber beacons, had dulled to a glassy resignation that recognized death's approach. Too weak to even growl, the massive cat could only watch as the human knelt within striking distance, close enough that even in its deteriorated state, a single swipe of its paw could open Alex's throat. But the lion didn't strike. It had no strength left for violence. 3 weeks trapped in the underground pit, a poacher's crude holding cell, had reduced the king of beasts to a prisoner starving in plain sight of the Kenyan savannah that had once been his kingdom. "Easy now," Alex whispered, his Australian accent softened by 7 years working Kenya's wildlife preserves. "Just a bit of water first, mate. Food comes later, when your system can handle it." As a senior wildlife veterinarian with the Mara Conservation Project, Alex had witnessed countless animals in distress, victims of poaching, drought, and human encroachment. But something about this lion's condition struck him with particular force. Perhaps it was the animal's eyes, which somehow maintained a dignity that his ravaged body had lost. Or perhaps it was the circumstances of their meeting, which had begun with a tip from a local herdsman and led to the discovery of one of the most sophisticated poaching operations the region had seen in decades. 48 hours earlier, Alex had been reviewing medical records at the project's headquarters when Samuel Kiprop, the anti-poaching unit's coordinator, burst into his office. "We found something," Samuel said, without preamble, his normally composed features tight with urgency. "The local Maasai reported unusual activity near the northern boundary. We need a wildlife medical team immediately." Within an hour, Alex was in a Land Rover bouncing along rugged terrain with his emergency medical kit and 2 rangers from the anti-poaching unit. Samuel briefed them during the drive. "The poachers have changed tactics," he explained grimly. "Instead of killing the animals on site, they're trapping them alive and holding them until transport arrives. We believe they've constructed underground holding pits, camouflaged and nearly undetectable from aerial surveillance." "Live transport," Alex frowned. "That's unusual for this region." Samuel nodded. "We think they're targeting lions specifically. The demand for live specimens from private collectors in the Middle East and Asia has skyrocketed. A healthy male can fetch upwards of $50,000. The implications were chilling. Unlike traditional poaching for parts, horns, tusks, pelts, this new approach meant prolonged suffering for the captured animals. Many would die before reaching their destinations. But the astronomical prices made the losses acceptable to the traffickers. When they reached the coordinates, Alex initially saw nothing unusual, just the familiar landscape of scrubland dotted with acacia trees. The rangers fanned out, following subtle signs invisible to the untrained eye. "Here," called Kibo, the younger ranger, after 20 minutes of methodical searching. He stood beside what appeared to be an ordinary thicket of brush, but as Alex approached, he could see how the natural vegetation had been carefully arranged to conceal a trapdoor constructed from local materials. When they lifted the camouflaged cover, the stench hit them first, the unmistakable odor of animal waste, blood, and decay. 10 feet below was a crude pit, its sides reinforced with scavenged metal and wood, and inside, lying motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its ribcage, was a fully grown male lion. "My God," Alex breathed, assessing the animal's condition with his experienced eye. Severe dehydration, starvation, multiple lacerations, likely from attempting to escape. The lion's once magnificent mane was matted with dirt and blood. "Is he alive?" Samuel asked, peering down. "Barely," Alex replied. "We need to get him out immediately. Radio headquarters for backup and the transport cage." and contact Dr. Nadia. We'll need the full medical team standing by at the sanctuary. The poachers could return, Cabo warned, scanning the horizon nervously. Then we work fast, Alex said, already unpacking his medical kit. This lion has hours left, not days. The rescue operation that followed tested every protocol in the conservation handbook. Tranquilizing an animal in such weakened condition carried extreme risks, but attempting to extract a conscious lion, even a severely debilitated one, was potentially suicidal. Alex calculated the minimum effective dose of sedative, administered it via dart gun, and then made the decision that would change everything that followed. "I'm going down there," he announced, already securing a rope to a nearby tree. "He needs immediate fluids before we even attempt to move him." Samuel's objection was immediate. "Absolutely not. Protocol requires—" "Protocol assumes we have time," Alex cut him off. "This lion doesn't. We can stabilize him enough for transport, or we can follow procedure and transport a corpse. Your choice." Without waiting for a response, Alex began his descent into the pit, medical backpack secured across his chest. The space was tight, airless, and reeked of death. The floor was littered with bones, evidence that smaller prey animals had occasionally been thrown in, either as minimal sustenance for the lion or, more likely, for the poacher's cruel entertainment. The lion's eyes tracked Alex's movement, but the sedative had taken effect enough to dull its responses. Up close, the animal's condition was even more heartbreaking. What should have been a 400-pound apex predator had been reduced to perhaps half that weight. Its golden coat had dulled to a sickly tan, and open sores marred its once powerful flanks. Alex worked methodically, establishing an IV line for emergency fluids and cleaning the most serious wounds. The lion offered no resistance, a concerning sign that indicated how close to death it truly was. "I'm calling him Lazarus," Alex said into his radio as he worked, "and because it's going to take a miracle to bring him back from the dead." 2 hours later, reinforcements arrived with the specialized transport equipment. By then, Alex had administered 2 liters of fluids, antibiotics, and anti-inflammatories. The lion, Lazarus, had stabilized enough for careful transport, though his condition remained critical. The journey to the sanctuary covered 30 miles of rough terrain, with Alex monitoring the lion's vital signs continuously. Twice during the trip, Lazarus stopped breathing, requiring emergency intervention. By the time they arrived at the medical facility, even the most optimistic team members questioned whether their efforts had been in vain. Dr. Nadia Kimathi, the sanctuary's director and Kenya's foremost expert on big cat rehabilitation, met them at the medical building. "You found him just in time," she said after her initial examination. "Another day in that pit, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." She glanced at Alex, noting his exhaustion. "You should get some rest. We'll take it from here." But Alex couldn't leave. For reasons he couldn't fully articulate, this particular rescue had affected him deeply. Perhaps it was the deliberate cruelty evidenced by the underground prison, or perhaps it was something in the lion's eyes, a resilience that persisted despite everything the animal had endured. "I'd like to stay," he said simply. Nadia understood. In their line of work, certain animals occasionally broke through the professional detachment that made conservation medicine possible. With a nod, she handed him a set of scrubs. The next 72 hours became a marathon of medical intervention. Intravenous fluids, carefully calculated nutrition, wound treatment, temperature regulation, blood transfusions from the sanctuary's donor database. Through it all, Alex remained, catching moments of sleep on a cot beside the treatment area, waking at each alarm or change in Lazarus's condition. Against all medical probability, the lion survived those critical first days. By the fourth morning, Lazarus was conscious enough to lift his head when Alex approached, tracking him with eyes that seemed more alert, more present. That's when Alex made his second protocol-breaking decision. "I want to try direct feeding," he told Nadia during their morning assessment. And not just the liquid nutrition through the tube, real food, hand-offered. Her objection mirrored Samuel's days earlier. "That's extremely dangerous, even with an animal this weak, and it violates every rehabilitation standard. We need to maintain proper boundaries for eventual release. I don't think conventional rehabilitation is an option here," Alex replied quietly. "The damage is too extensive. He's going to need long-term care." What he didn't articulate was the connection he felt forming. A tenuous thread of trust established during those desperate hours in the pit and strengthened through days of constant contact. Standard wildlife medicine emphasized minimizing human interaction to preserve wild behaviors, but Alex sensed that Lazarus's survival might depend on a different approach. Nadia considered Alex's proposal, her professional instincts warring with the unique circumstances of this case. After a long moment, she nodded reluctantly. "We'll try it once, under controlled conditions. If there's any sign of aggression, any sign at all, we revert to standard protocols." That afternoon, under the watchful eyes of two safety officers with tranquilizer guns at the ready, Alex entered Lazarus's enclosure, carrying a small amount of fresh meat. The lion was awake but lethargic, his massive head resting on paws that seemed too thin to support the weight of his skull. Those amber eyes tracked Alex's approach, showing neither fear nor aggression, just a quiet awareness. "Ooh, hey, big guy," Alex said softly, kneeling at a distance that would have given any wildlife veterinarian heart palpitations. "I brought you something better than that tube-feeding stuff." He placed the bowl on the ground and slid it forward, stopping about 3 feet from Lazarus. Then, breaking yet another cardinal rule of wildlife rehabilitation, he removed the tongs from his pocket and hand-fed the first small piece of meat directly to the lion. The room held its collective breath as Lazarus's nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the first real food he'd encountered in weeks. With effort that highlighted his weakness, the lion raised his head slightly, his rough tongue extended, taking the meat from Alex's outstretched tongs with surprising gentleness. "That's it," Alex encouraged, offering another small piece. Nice and slow. Over the next 20 minutes, Alex fed Lazarus a carefully measured meal, enough to provide crucial nutrition without overwhelming a digestive system compromised by starvation. Throughout the process, the lion remained unnaturally calm, accepting each offering without the defensive food aggression typical of apex predators. "And I've never seen anything like it," Nadia admitted when they debriefed afterward. "He's responding to you more like a domestic animal than a wild lion." "He knows I helped him," Alex replied, though even he recognized how unscientific that sounded. "Or at least he associates me with relief from pain and hunger." Nadia wasn't convinced. "Or he's simply too weak to display normal defensive behaviors. We need to be careful about projecting human emotions onto these interactions, Alex." But over the coming days, Lazarus's behavior became increasingly difficult to explain through conventional wildlife medicine. As his strength gradually returned, his unusual response to Alex remained constant. While the lion displayed typical wariness around other staff members, he visibly relaxed when Alex entered the recovery space. By the second week, Lazarus would actually shift position to maintain visual contact with the veterinarian during examinations and treatments. The sanctuary staff began to notice other anomalies. Unlike most recovering predators, who instinctively concealed signs of weakness, Lazarus would deliberately show injured areas to Alex, positioning his body to expose wounds that needed attention. During painful procedures, the lion maintained an eerie stillness, as if understanding the treatment's necessity. "It's almost like he's cooperating," one of the junior veterinarians remarked after watching Lazarus calmly allow Alex to flush a particularly deep wound on his flank. Physical recovery proceeded with agonizing slowness. The damage from prolonged starvation extended beyond mere weight loss, muscle atrophy, organ stress, immune system compromise. Each small improvement was counterbalanced by setbacks, infections that his weakened system struggled to fight, joints damaged from confinement, pressure sores that resisted healing. 3 weeks into Lazarus's rehabilitation, Alex found Nadia reviewing the latest blood work with a troubled expression. "His kidney values are concerning," she said without preamble, "and his calcium levels suggest his body is still cannibalizing bone mass despite the nutritional support." "He needs more than medicine," Alex replied after studying the results. "He needs purpose, a reason to fight." The statement might have sounded absurdly anthropomorphic coming from anyone else, but Nadia had witnessed enough of the unusual bond forming between man and lion to consider the suggestion seriously. "What are you proposing?" The next day, they began what the staff came to call the experiment. Breaking with traditional recovery protocols that emphasized minimal human contact, Alex instituted a new regimen. He began spending hours in the recovery enclosure with Lazarus, not just during feeding and treatment, but during quiet periods where he simply sat nearby, sometimes reading reports aloud, sometimes just existing in the same space. At first, the lion merely watched from his corner, conserving the limited energy his body could produce. But gradually, day by day, Lazarus began responding. He started positioning himself closer to Alex during these sessions. By the end of the week, the lion had established a pattern of settling within arm's reach, occasionally extending his massive head toward Alex's hand, in what the team could only interpret as a request for contact. The first time Alex touched Lazarus beyond medical necessity created another protocol-shattering moment. With the safety team watching nervously, he slowly extended his hand toward the lion's mane. Lazarus closed his eyes as Alex's fingers made contact, a rumbling sound emanating from his chest that in a domestic cat would unquestionably be called a purr. "This is unprecedented," Nadia said later, reviewing the footage. "I've worked with captive-born lions that weren't this comfortable with human contact." Alex had a theory forming, one that seemed simultaneously rational and impossible. "I think the circumstances of his rescue created a cognitive break. He was literally hours from death when we found him. Every interaction since then has reinforced that humans, or at least this specific human, represents survival." The physical improvements began accelerating alongside these interaction breakthroughs. Lazarus's appetite increased, his coat regained some of its luster, and the open wounds finally began showing signs of proper healing. The hollow cavities around his eyes filled in as life gradually returned to his wasted frame. 6 weeks after the rescue, Lazarus managed to stand unassisted for the first time. The moment was captured on the sanctuary's monitoring system, the lion struggling to coordinate weakened limbs, collapsing twice before successfully rising to his feet. What made the footage remarkable wasn't just this milestone, but what happened immediately afterward. Lazarus looked directly at the enclosure door, the direction from which Alex always entered, as if wishing to share the accomplishment. When shown the video, Alex requested permission to move Lazarus to an outdoor recovery area. He needs sunlight, natural stimuli. The sensory deprivation of the medical enclosure is hindering his psychological recovery. The transition to the outdoor space marked another turning point. With access to grass beneath his paws, natural air currents carrying the scents of the savanna and the sounds of the sanctuary around him, Lazarus showed renewed engagement with his environment. His muscles, atrophied from confinement and starvation, gradually began rebuilding as he progressed from standing to halting walks around the enclosure. Throughout this period, Alex remained a constant presence. His initial 2-week assignment to the case had extended to a month, then 2, with the sanctuary's administration raising no objections. The unique nature of the recovery and the international attention it was beginning to attract justified the dedicated resources. Media interest had indeed begun to focus on the remarkable case. A wildlife photographer visiting the sanctuary to document their rhino conservation program captured the first public images of Alex and Lazarus together. The photos, showing the still, gaunt lion leaning against the kneeling veterinarian, went viral almost immediately. Conservation organizations worldwide shared the story as an emblem of hope amid Africa's poaching crisis. The publicity brought unexpected consequences. 8 weeks after Lazarus's rescue, Alex was reviewing treatment options with Nadia when the sanctuary's security chief interrupted them. "But we've received a credible threat," he announced without preamble. "Intelligence suggests the poaching network is unhappy about the attention Lazarus is generating. They're particularly concerned about what you might have discovered at the trap site." The implied danger was clear. By rescuing Lazarus and exposing the underground holding system, Alex and the team had disrupted a highly profitable trafficking operation. The evidence collected from the pit was already helping authorities track the network's activities across 3 countries. "Are you suggesting they would attack the sanctuary?" Nadia asked incredulously. "We're increasing security as a precaution," the chief replied. "But Dr. Miller may want to consider temporary relocation. Sources indicate he's been specifically mentioned." Alex dismissed the suggestion immediately. "I'm not abandoning Lazarus or the sanctuary because of threats. Just tell me what additional security measures I need to follow." That night, unable to sleep despite the long day, Alex found himself returning to the outdoor recovery enclosure. Breaking yet another safety protocol, he entered alone, carrying only a flashlight. Lazarus was awake, his eyes reflecting the beam as Alex approached. "Hey, big guy," Alex said softly, settling on the ground beside the lion. "Rough day for both of us, huh?" He hadn't brought food or medicine, just his presence. To his surprise, Lazarus shifted position, moving with deliberate care until his body pressed against Alex's side. The lion's head came to rest against Alex's leg with a weight that conveyed both trust and exhaustion. They remained that way for nearly an hour, man and lion, in a companionable silence that defied natural order. Alex found himself talking softly about the threats, the challenges ahead for Lazarus's recovery, and his own conflicted feelings about the intense connection he'd developed with an animal that conventional wisdom said should never be treated as a companion. "The thing is," he confessed to the drowsy lion, "I don't know what happens next. You're making remarkable progress, but you'll never be releasable. Your muscles may recover, but the psychological imprinting—" He sighed. "And I can't stay forever. I have responsibilities elsewhere, other animals who need help." Lazarus shifted slightly, his amber eyes reflecting something that Alex, despite his scientific training, could only interpret as understanding. The moment crystallized the core dilemma of wildlife conservation, the tension between individual welfare and appropriate boundaries between humans and wild animals. The following morning, sanctuary staff arrived to find Alex asleep in Lazarus's enclosure, his back against the lion's significantly underweight but improving frame. The sight, a perfect illustration of the unprecedented bond, was both remarkable and professionally concerning. Nadia called an emergency meeting of the sanctuary's leadership team. "This situation has evolved beyond standard rehabilitation," she began, displaying the latest medical charts. "Lazarus is making extraordinary physical progress, but his attachment to Alex presents a long-term challenge." "The attachment goes both ways," observed Samuel, who had joined the rehabilitation team after the initial rescue. "Alex is equally bonded to this animal." The discussion that followed centered on ethics rather than medicine. Wildlife conservation had established boundaries for good reasons. maintaining appropriate distance, preserved wild behaviors, and prevented dangerous imprinting. But Lazarus's case defied categorization. His physical trauma was healing, but the psychological impact of his capture and near-death experience had created a behavioral pattern unlike anything in their collective experience. "He'll never be a candidate for release," Nadia concluded. The question is what kind of life we can provide that honors his nature while acknowledging his unique circumstances. When Alex joined the meeting, he listened to their concerns with understanding but remained steadfast in his approach. "I know this breaks every rule in the handbook," he acknowledged. But we're not dealing with theoretical best practices anymore. We're dealing with this specific lion and his specific needs." "And what happens when your assignment ends?" Nadia challenged gently. "You have responsibilities in Australia. The projected recovery time for Lazarus extends at least another 6 months. The question had been weighing on Alex for weeks. His 2-month emergency assignment in Kenya had already been extended twice. But his position at the Wildlife Hospital in Sydney would not remain open indefinitely. "I've been thinking about that," he replied carefully. "I'd like to propose something unconventional." 2 days later, Alex presented a formal proposal to the sanctuary's board of directors. The document outlined a specialized rehabilitation program, unlike any attempted in conservation medicine, a one-on-one recovery protocol that would maintain the established bond between human and lion while gradually introducing appropriate boundaries. More controversially, it proposed relocating Lazarus to a private conservation facility in South Africa once his condition stabilized, a facility where Alex had arranged to transfer his practice. "This is unprecedented," the board chairman noted after reviewing the detailed plan. "We'd be establishing a concerning precedent for individualized care that most rescue organizations simply cannot sustain." "I understand that concern," Alex countered. "But I would argue that Lazarus's case is already unprecedented. The documentation of his recovery will advance our understanding of psychological factors in wildlife rehabilitation, particularly for animals that have experienced extreme trauma." After extensive deliberation, the board approved the plan with modifications and strict oversight requirements. The sanctuary would document every aspect of Lazarus's unusual recovery, creating a case study that might inform future approaches to severely traumatized wildlife. As anticipated, the decision generated controversy within the wildlife conservation community. Some colleagues criticized what they viewed as excessive anthropomorphism and attachment to a single animal at the expense of broader conservation goals. Others recognized the potential value in studying a recovery that defied conventional understanding. Through these professional debates, Lazarus's physical condition continued to improve. By the 4th month of rehabilitation, he had regained nearly 60% of his healthy weight. The prominent ribs that had made his early photos so shocking were now covered with increasing muscle mass. His coat had regained its golden hue, and the beginnings of a mane were becoming visible again around his face. With improved strength came behavioral changes that both encouraged and concerned the rehabilitation team. Lazarus began displaying more typical lion behaviors: territorial marking, interest in environmental enrichment, occasionally even asserting dominance through vocalizations when other staff approached. Yet his response to Alex remained unique. The lion maintained their unusual connection, displaying a level of trust that contradicted natural instincts. The most vivid demonstration of this trust occurred during Lazarus's 5th month of recovery. Alex had begun taking the lion for short, controlled walks within the sanctuary's secure perimeter, an activity that provided crucial exercise while stimulating natural behaviors. During one such session, they encountered one of the sanctuary's resident female lions separated by a reinforced fence barrier. The interaction that followed stunned even the most experienced staff. Instead of displaying typical male territorial aggression, Lazarus positioned himself between the female and Alex in what could only be interpreted as a protective stance. When the female charged the fence, Lazarus responded with a warning roar that contained none of the competitive mating behavior typical of male lions encountering females. "He's protecting you," Nadia observed in amazement. "He's categorizing you as pride rather than competition or prey." Alex nodded, equally astonished by the behavior. The social imprinting has overridden even reproductive instincts." The implications were profound, suggesting cognitive processes more complex than typically attributed to even apex predators. Lazarus had somehow rewritten the fundamental wiring of his species, creating a category for Alex that existed outside the natural order of lion social structures. By the 6th month, preparations for Lazarus's transfer to South Africa were underway. The private conservation facility, funded by a wildlife philanthropist who had followed Lazarus's story from the beginning, offered sprawling natural habitats for big cats unable to return to the wild. More importantly, it had created a specialized position for Alex that would allow him to continue overseeing Lazarus's care while working with other rescued wildlife. The journey would present significant challenges. Lazarus's improved condition made him more difficult to transport than when he had been at death's door. Despite his unusual trust in Alex, the lion retained enough wild instincts to make the 16-hour journey potentially dangerous for all involved. On the day before departure, Alex sat with Lazarus in what had become their usual position. The lion's massive body pressed against his side in a companionship that defied natural order. Lazarus's weight had nearly doubled since his rescue, his frame now covered with healthy muscle mass, though still leaner than a typical male in his prime. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult for both of us," Alex told him, unconsciously stroking the now substantial mane. "But we'll get through it together." As if understanding the words, Lazarus shifted position to look directly at Alex, those amber eyes communicating something that transcended species boundaries. Then, in a gesture that had become familiar between them, the lion gently pressed his forehead against Alex's chest, a behavior more reminiscent of domestic cats than wild predators. The transport proceeded according to the meticulously developed protocol. Lazarus was sedated with the minimum effective dose, carefully monitored throughout the 16-hour journey by Alex and a specialized veterinary transport team. When they arrived at the South African facility, the lion was settled into a spacious transitional habitat designed to ease his adjustment to the new environment. As the sedation wore off, Lazarus displayed the expected disorientation and stress of awakening in unfamiliar surroundings. His agitation grew as he explored the boundaries of the new space, roaring with increasing distress. The facility staff watched nervously as the powerful predator, now a far more formidable creature than the skeletal animal rescued from the poacher's pit, paced with growing agitation. Then Alex entered the habitat. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Lazarus froze, his attention fixed on the familiar human. Then, with a chuffing sound that had become his distinctive greeting, the lion approached Alex with the same trust he had displayed in Kenya. The tension visibly drained from the massive body as Lazarus pressed against Alex's legs in what the observing staff could only describe as relief. "Ooh, welcome home, buddy," Alex said softly, kneeling beside the lion who had defied death, science, and the natural order to forge this impossible connection. The South African facility became the setting for the next phase of their journey together. Over the following year, Alex worked to help Lazarus achieve the delicate balance between their unusual bond and appropriate independence. The goal was never to return him to the wild. That possibility had been lost the moment poachers dropped him into that underground prison, but to give him the most fulfilled life possible within his circumstances. Gradually, Lazarus adapted to his new environment. His territory expanded to include 5 acres of naturalistic habitat, complete with elevated resting platforms, watering holes, and appropriate enrichment. Under Alex's guidance, the lion even began forming tentative social connections with other rescued big cats in adjacent habitats. 2 years after his rescue, Lazarus had transformed completely from the skeletal figure in those first heartbreaking photographs. Now weighing over 400 pounds, with a full mane and powerful physique, he had become an ambassador for conservation efforts across Africa. Visitors to the sanctuary's educational center learned his story through carefully guided viewing opportunities, while the scientific documentation of his recovery continued to challenge conventional understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. Throughout this transformation, the connection between man and lion remained. Alex's role evolved from critical caregiver to companion, their interactions less frequent but no less profound. He maintained a small residence on the sanctuary grounds, continuing his work with other rescued wildlife while ensuring Lazarus's ongoing well-being. The poaching network that had so nearly ended Lazarus's life eventually faced justice. Information gathered from the underground pit, combined with intelligence from ongoing investigations, led to the arrest of 14 individuals connected to the operation. Evidence recovered during these arrests helped dismantle 2 additional wildlife trafficking networks operating across East Africa. On the 3rd anniversary of Lazarus's rescue, National Geographic released a documentary chronicling their extraordinary journey. The film, featuring footage from the initial rescue through the lion's remarkable recovery, became one of the most watched wildlife documentaries in the organization's history. In the documentary's most powerful scene, Alex sits at the edge of Lazarus's habitat as sunset bathes the South African landscape in golden light. The massive lion approaches the boundary, greeting Alex with the same gentle head press that had become their ritual. Though separated by a safety barrier that acknowledged the reality of a fully recovered apex predator, the connection between them remained palpable. "I don't have a scientific explanation for what happened between us," Alex tells the interviewer. "I can describe the physiological processes of his recovery, the psychological factors that likely influenced his response to human interaction after trauma. But that doesn't capture the essence of it." The camera pans to Lazarus, now the picture of leonine majesty, watching Alex with that same unnerving focus that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "Sometimes," Alex continues, "we have to accept that there are connections in nature that exist beyond our current understanding. Lazarus didn't just survive against impossible odds. He chose a path that should have been instinctively impossible for his species. That choice challenges everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between humans and wildlife." As if acknowledging these words, Lazarus rises and moves parallel to Alex along the habitat boundary, maintaining their connection even as they walk separate paths. A living embodiment of the delicate balance between wild and tame, independence and connection that continues to define their remarkable journey together.